it's a contract that is endless. So it ends with death as a default. Okay? So the default of marriage is that it does not end. So marriage or nikah is a contract. Okay? Contract for what? What does a contract entail? The contract entails enjoyment. Right? The husband enjoys the wife and the wife enjoys her husband. A contract of enjoyment. In a manner that is lawful. A contract to agree that we are enjoying each other, husband and wife, in a manner that is lawful. And lawful, of course, Islamically. Okay? So, based on that, it is impermissible, right? Because it's a contract. It is impermissible for a man to enjoy a woman, whether it's looking, whether it's listening, right? Whether it's touching. It is impermissible for a man to enjoy a woman or a woman to enjoy a man outside of this contract unless this woman or man is an immediate relative. And we'll talk about those immediate relatives that are impermissible to marry.
How about the concubines?
I'm sorry, what?
The concubines? How about that?
Or a concubine. No. So it's a contract, and this contract entails what? What does a contract entail? Remind me. So a contract that entails enjoyment. A man, a husband enjoying his wife, and a wife enjoying her husband. Okay? Now enjoyment can mean, just looking at each other. It's a form of enjoyment. Talking with one another is a form of enjoyment. Because women are attracted to men and men are attracted to women by default. It's natural. So because of this natural attraction, there is a form of enjoyment, and you may have experienced this enjoyment when just talking with a random girl at the store, for example, a cash register, cashier, or for girls talking to a random guy, right? There's a different dynamic when a man is interacting with a woman than there is when a man is interacting with a man, or a woman interacting with a man than there is when a woman is interacting with a woman. There's a different dynamic, and that's just natural. So in order for you to be able to enjoy this from a woman who is not your immediate relative, or as you so eloquently put it, concubine, which is not something that is practical nowadays, but we still do study it because it's part of our deen, then it's impermissible. Okay. And of course, nikah or marriage is lawful. Okay? And it's agreed upon among the scholars that nikah is lawful. There's no difference of opinion. Okay? And we find the evidence for this in the Quran and in the Sunnah throughout. Prophet ﷺ said, or Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, فَانْكِحُوا مَا طَابَ لَكُم مِّنَ النِّسَاءِ مَثْنَى وَثُلَاثَ وَرُبَاعَ فَإِنْ خِفْتُمْ أَلَّا تَعْدِلُوا فَوَاحِدًا أَوْ مَا مَلَكَتْ أَيْمَانُكُمْ. Marry, فَانْكِحُوا, do nikah. Young men, we're here, right? So be with us, please. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said that you should marry, ankihu, what is طابة, what you want from women, whether it's 2, 3, or 4. But if you're afraid you will not be just, then marry one. Right? And other ayat and other ahadith. Prophet ﷺ said, "O young men," and as we know, we've discussed this before, in our tradition, whether it's from the Quran or the Hadith or from the sayings of the Sahaba, when the person who is addressed is male, right? The speech also pertains to females. When I say, for example, students, pay attention, I'm talking to male and female. Okay? Unless there's some sort of evidence or indicator that this only pertains to men. That's when it is only talking about men. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, معشر الشباب من استطاع منكم الباءة فليتزوج. O shabab, O youth, young people, whoever is able to, meaning able to, ba'a, al-ba'a is referring to you have the financial ability, you have the cognitive ability, you have the maturity, right, to marry, then you should marry, right? فليتزوج فإنه أغض للبصر, because it helps you lower your gaze. أغض للبصر, right? It helps you lower your gaze. Got that, Allam? What does it mean to lower your gaze? What does it mean to lower your gaze? What does it mean to lower your gaze, Umar?
I guess it doesn't just refer to looking down when you see the opposite gender. It's just everything like that relates to, interacting with the opposite gender.
So gaze means your eyes, what you're looking at. Lowering it means to look down. But like you said, it doesn't necessarily mean to look down, but it means to look away. Right? So you're not supposed to be looking. Prophet ﷺ said, فَإِنَّهُ أَغَضُّ لِلْبَصَرِ. It helps lower your gaze. It helps you in lowering your gaze. Because whatever you're looking at, you have a wife at home. Or for a woman, whatever you're looking at, you have a husband at home. Okay? فَإِنَّهُ أَغَضُّ لِلْبَصَرِ وَأَحْصَنُ لِلْفَرْجِ. And it is easier with marriage to protect your privates. Right? To stay away from anything that is haram. وَمَنْ لَمْ يَسْتَطِعْ فَعَلَيْهِ بِالصَّوْمِ فَإِنَّهُ لَهُ وِجَاءٌ. And whoever is unable, right, whether it's financial, whether it's kada, then they should fast. Why? Because it is a form of protection. Right? Protection from what? From having for being overly obsessive. Because what feeds the desire is sustenance, food. Right? If your veins are dry, then in turn you're unable to, you're not thinking about it. Some people say, well, I fast, but it still doesn't help. It's a valid point. A lot of times the issue with fasting that doesn't help is because you're eating so much after you break your fast. So when you break your fast, eat light, right? So that you, you're not satiated, right? You're not fully full. And also, exercise helps. Anyway, فإنه غض للبصر. وحديث Prophet ﷺ said, معقل بن يسار رضي الله عنه said, Prophet ﷺ said, تزوجوا الودود الولود فإني مكاثر بكم الأمم. Marry a woman who is, sociable and can bear children. And of course, as we said, if something pertains to men, it also pertains to women. So for women, marry a man who's sociable, who you can enjoy, and who is likely to be able to have children. Clear? Any questions? Okay, there are a few things why marriage is lawful. Right? Of course, there's a lot of reasons, but there are a few things that we can mention. as human beings, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created a certain desire, right, in us. And as Muslims, we believe that this desire is good. Other religions may see this desire as something that is bad. This lustful desire is bad, right? It calls us to sin, right? So it's bad. But we as Muslims, we know that this desire is good because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave it to us. And just like any other desire, we are to put it in its rightful place, right? So like one of us may be interested in sport, okay? Physical activities. This is good. But with this physical activities, we're not supposed to go around hurting people. And you say, this is what I like to do, right? So when you're going around hurting people, you're putting your desire in the wrong place, right? So you should dispense of it lawfully. Same thing with the desire for marriage, then you dispense it in its rightful place. So it helps us dispense it in its rightful place, right? Whatever desire it is. It also, one of the reasons or the causes for marriage is so that we can have comfort. Because human beings are social animals. Ladies, thank you. Spinning top, thank you. You don't have to be here, right? I'm not holding you here with a gun, telling you to stay, right? If you guys have questions, you can ask, right? I want you to benefit from the class, right? If you're bored and it doesn't make sense, let me know. I can try to make it more fun, right? I want you guys here, but you guys have to, you got to work with me, all right? Yeah? You want to beat me up? I can fight too, Mash. Fight. Human beings are social creatures. And we feel most comfortable with the opposite sex. That's just how we are. Okay? So when you get married, this helps you find comfort. Now, we're talking about comfort. Sometimes, when marriage happens, there's no comfort. Because the man is stubborn or the woman is stubborn, or both. Okay? This is called a toxic relationship. Right? So we want to remove toxic relationships. So don't get married to a person who you don't feel compatible with. You don't feel like, he or she is going to be the one for you. Right? Don't. Because there needs to be comfort. But generally, the relationship between the opposite sex, there's a sort of comfort that is there. And that's part of why there is marriage. Another reason why there is marriage is to protect our lineage. Right? Because if people were just sleeping around, so to speak, then you wouldn't know who was who. Right? And what that causes is chaos in society, which is what we see today. Right? You find people that don't know who their grandfather is. Right? So, because they don't know who their grandfather, or people that don't even know who their father or mother is. And the fact that they don't know where they come from, they don't know their father or mother, that causes them to be careless with how they interact with others, because they have no name to live up to. Okay? So that's harmful. So part of marriage is to protect our lineage. Also, one of the reasons why we're getting married, or why marriage is lawful, is so that the human species can live on. Another reason is so that we can protect good manners. As I said before, when there's a lack of connection to family, bad manners become prevalent. And that's what we see today, nowadays. The family connection is made to be secondary, therefore there are a lot of problems in society. All right. Is marriage, what is the ruling on marriage? So do you have to get married? Do you not have to get married? Is it mandatory to get married? What is the ruling on marriage? You guys know?
Depends on the situation.
Depends on the situation. What do you think, Abdul?
Yeah, I thought it was depending on the situation, but it is 1/3 or 2/3 of our deed to get married.
They say it completes half of your religion.
Completes half of the religion.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's almost mandatory, I would think. But it's, you know, when, like
So
you say,
as
financially-
we said, marriage is a contract.
Right.
In a contract, right, there are agreements. There are things that need to be upheld in a contract. And mostly in a contract, both parties have rights and responsibilities. So if you do such and such, you get so and so. Right? If you get so and so, then you do such and such, like that. So if you're able to provide, to be a good husband, to provide financially, and to provide emotionally, because that's part of your responsibility. If you're able to fulfill the rights of your wife. Likewise for a woman, if you're able to fulfill the responsibilities towards your husband, right? If you're able to be responsible and raise children, right? With the addition of fear of falling into haram. So you have the ability to fulfill the rights and responsibilities with the addition of fear of falling into haram. Then it becomes mandatory for you to marry. Yes.
Can you just repeat it, what you just said?
If you have the ability to marry physically and financially and emotionally, right? The emotional maturity to care for a wife, and you're afraid of falling into haram, zina, then it's mandatory for you to marry. Yes.
Okay, and also, what is the, like, when we say, like, financial, because one person might say, I need to have $1 million.
So financially is going to be according to the norms of where you live and the norms of how she grew up, the woman that you're marrying, what she's used to. If you're able to keep up her standards of living, right? You have the financial ability to upkeep her standards of living, or the standards of living of the typical girl in your area, then, and you are afraid of falling into haram, then marriage is mandatory. Does that make sense? Okay, so the financial means you're able to maintain a woman according to the general standards of your area. So I'd say, for example, your income is like 60,000 a year, between 40 and 60,000,
You can have a wife.
depending on the family. Yeah.
So it's like, so if you just say you're a person, you fit the standard category, but say you're trying to, you have your own financial goals, or that doesn't even matter at this point. It's like if you, I'm just,
Financial goals is something different. I'm talking about your current situation. Forget about the goals. Your current situation. Your income is sufficient for you and another, according to the standards of where you live. Okay? And you're afraid of falling into zina, falling into haram, khalas, you have to get married. It's wajib. It is incumbent upon you to get married. If you don't seek out marriage, then you are in sin. Clear?
Is 40 enough? 40 a year really enough?
I'm not. It depends. It's gonna depend on the girl you're marrying. It's gonna depend. Because some girls they grew up in poverty. So 40K a year is enough, right?
Some grew up rich, so it's like.
So it has. I mean, I'm talking about norms, right? So if you're like in the ghetto, for example, right? If you're talking about marrying a refugee, or a girl from a refugee family, for example, or if you're talking about marrying, a girl who's been, given everything she wanted, she's been pampered all her life, right? It's going to be different. So depending on the girl's financial upbringing, what she's used to, that's what you're going to be expected to provide.
So, like, I guess, like, in that case, are you forced to go find someone who, I don't want to put it this way because it's gonna sound wrong, but like
You
are
have to
forced
you
find
have to
someone
look.
cheaper,
You have to look,
you know?
right? So the wajib part is you seeking out marriage, right? That's the wajib part. For girls, they don't seek out marriage, right? But what they do is, traditionally, they shouldn't seek out marriage. But what they do is they make dua, and they're willing to accept if someone comes, right? Now, if a woman does go out and tells a person who's of high stature that she wants to, she's interested in marrying, that's also fine. Right? It's not a problem. If a father seeks a good husband for his daughter, that's also fine. If a brother seeks a good husband for his sister, that's also fine. But like traditionally, the woman should not go out looking for a husband, traditionally. But if that happens, that's also fine.
So, okay, you kind of ended the question there.
So, yeah, marriage is mandatory, meaning seeking out marriage, looking to try to get married. It's mandatory. It's mandatory for you to look. If you have the ability, meaning financially, emotionally, together, and you're afraid of falling into haram.
How does one seek out marriage? Or are you gonna cover that later?
It's not part of fiqh.
Yeah.
How to seek out marriage is going to depend on culture. Okay? In America, there are so many cultures that you can't say this is the one way to seek out marriage. Right? It's going to depend. The most basic thing that one needs to do when they're trying to get married is make a lot of dua. Right? Because the woman that you're trying to get married to may even come to you. She may not say to you, Umar, I want to get married. But, you may be at the grocery store and you see this young lady with her husband, with her father, not her husband, excuse me, not with her husband. You see a young lady who's attractive, right? And you ask the question and, everything becomes easy. Okay? It may not happen right away. It may happen right away. It may happen later on, but at least you're looking. All right? You're seeking it out. Marriage can be also recommended. Not mandatory, but recommended. If a person is able to marry, right? Physically, emotionally, financially. However, is not afraid of falling into zina. Not afraid of falling into haram. Okay? So it's recommended for that person to get married. Why? Because they're able and because the Prophet ﷺ encouraged us to get married. If they don't get married, then there's nothing wrong with that. Marriage can also be neutral. Neither here nor there. That's if a person is kind of financially stable and is, marriage is not really on his mind so much. If they get married, then it's permissible. If they don't get married, then. Marriage can also be makruh, disliked, right? Or even haram. If a person has a sort of physical defect where they're unable to do the things with a wife that a husband should do with their wife, or like a woman who's unable to do, right? Or a person who's up there in age. Okay? If they were to get married, they would probably cause more harm than good. It could be either disliked or it could even be haram.
So if you can't fulfill the rights of the opposite gender, it's haram.
Fast. Yeah. So again, it depends on your situation. Choosing a wife, there are things that you want to look for that are recommended, and this is for both genders, male and female. Prophet ﷺ said, a woman is married for 4 things: for her wealth, for her lineage, for her beauty, and for her akhlaq or deen, for her code of conduct. Prophet ﷺ said, فَاظْفَرْ بِذَاتِ الدِّينِ تَرِبَتْ يَدَاكَ. Win over the one who has deen. That's the best thing you could do. Likewise with men. Men are married for several reasons, right? The best reason to marry a man is for his deen. And when I say deen, this does not mean that he prays in the masjid 5 times a day, necessarily, right? That's not the only criteria. His deen does not mean that he has a beard, right? Necessarily. It's part of it, but that's not what it means. His deen does not mean that, he memorized the Quran, for example. Right? That doesn't mean that. What it means is, how does he conduct himself with others? That's what deen is. Deen is a way of life, how you do things. Because a person's worship, a person's beard, a person's clothing, a person's qada, that benefits themselves. But what benefits others is how they interact with others. Likewise with a woman. Just because she has on a hijab, she's dressed properly, she says the right words, right? She goes to the masjid, she's in the right gatherings, does not mean she's a good sister. Right? You have to know who she is with others. Likewise with men, you have to know how that man is with others. Okay? How they conduct themselves. Do they lie? Do they cheat? Right? Do they bully? Do they take advantage of others when they can? Right? Yeah. Are they willing to sacrifice for others? Or are they selfish? Right? All these things are important. It's not just, she smiles nice and I smile nice. Let's make this happen. No, it's not. It's more than that. That's why it's important for families to get involved. Because when you're interacting with a person's family, you understand more about that person than if you were just interacting with that person on themselves. Because they didn't just come out of a vacuum. They didn't just pop out of the sky. Okay? It's recommended, especially for first-time marriages, for a person who's marrying for their first time, that they also marry another that's marrying for their first time. Okay? It's recommended. So if it's your first time getting married, you should also marry a woman who's getting married for the first time. Likewise, for a woman, if it's her first time getting married, then she should look for someone who's getting married for the first time. Why? Because they grow together.
By that logic, someone who's getting remarried should get married to someone who's getting remarried?
Not necessarily, but that's what's recommended. Okay. Now, if it is a person who's getting remarried, so for example, a person who's married before, right, and it didn't work out and they want to get married again, their experience is different now that they've been married before. Right? There's certain things that they've been through that they understand that the person that they're marrying, if it's their first time marriage, that they wouldn't know.
Yeah.
So either they have a leg up and it will be beneficial, or it'll be detrimental for the other. So you want to keep the other person in consideration, right? If it's a first time marriage, because you don't want to be, you don't want to cause harm. Okay? So if a person has been married before and they're getting married again, so we're actually getting into more social work than we are in the fiqh.
Yeah, sorry.
That's fine, because it's part of it. It's all connected. Then harm could be caused, and you want to avoid that as much as possible. Okay? Things need to be clear. Right? You don't want to go into a marriage based on deceit. Right? You want things to be open and clear.
Actually, I just thought of something. It's also possible, like if a man is marrying multiple women, then it won't be his first time. So,
That's also fine, but the new wife needs to know what she's getting into, and he has to be just with his other wives.
yeah,
And not every man knows how to do that. And he could be putting himself in a situation where he's causing more harm than good. Right? So marrying multiple wives is permissible, by all means. But it needs to be done in an environment where the rights of all wives are met. And she can demand her rights. Okay? Because what tends to happen when there's no accountability, right? The stronger person in the relationship tends to take advantage of the weaker one. That's just common sense. That's just how things happen. So, in the West, or in an environment where polygyny is unlawful, usually the woman ends up getting the shorter hand of the stick. That's just because there's no consequences for the man. Right? Who's she gonna complain to? Right? She gonna complain to the imam? Right? Okay, no problem. What's the imam gonna do? The imam's gonna assault him. The imam assaults him, the imam goes to prison for assault. Right? Get a hit squad to beat him up. There's no consequence. Right? The consequences are, so, I mean, you're not making something that is permissible impermissible, but at the same time, you're talking about the ethics. Right? We said you want to marry someone who has good akhlaq. Right? And if a person is doing shady deals with other women, then what kind of akhlaq is that? Yeah. So, yeah. It'd be one thing if a person is well off, right? He makes, a lot of money, right? And he's able to have two houses and put things in that second wife's name. Right? So for example, he has two wives, right? One house for the first wife and the other house for the second wife, and it's hers. He gives it to her. It's in her name. Right? She has a stipend every month, And I'm just giving hypotheticals here. Right? Whereas she doesn't need to demand her rights because it's given to her. It's not an issue. Right? She's set for life. Then yeah, by all means. But if you're struggling to live, right? Your first wife is on food stamps, right? And you're giving your second wife pennies to live. I mean, like, what are we doing? Right? We said that there needs to be a form of second, right? Comfort. So she was living okay at home, and now you're having her live on pennies, what kind of comfort are you providing her? Anyway, a lot of abuse happens, unfortunately. In marriages, there's a lot of abuse that happens. Then abuse can go both ways. Right? A woman can abuse her husband, and a man can abuse his wife. Unfortunately, because of the power dynamics, you know, the more cases of abuse is from the man to the woman, right? But there are cases of abuse where a woman is abusing her husband. Anyway, where were we? How do you choose a wife? I don't know how we got into, went off on a tangent. But al-khutbah. Al-khutbah does not mean the khutbah al-jumu'ah. Khutbah means what? An engagement. An engagement is not binding. Okay? An engagement is not binding. An engagement is an agreement, non-binding agreement between a man and a woman or her family that they will get married. Okay? It's not binding. If, for example, Umar goes to Sa'diyah, who he wants to marry, and he knows her family, and he tells them that he's interested in marrying Sa'diyah, and the family preliminarily agrees on this marriage. This is called a khutubah, an engagement. Okay? They are still not married, right? They don't go out to dinner and you know whatever, go to the movies, right? Unless there's like a chaperone, there's a third party with them. Okay? So once this happens, this khutubah happens, this engagement happens, it is impermissible for Hamza to go and get engaged to Sa'diyah. Right? Because Hamza knows that Umar is already engaged. Okay? Even if Hamza knows that Sa'diyah is going to like him more than she likes Umar. Sabi Umar. My, no offense, brother.
That's some cap.
Uh-huh.
That's
It's still impermissible. Okay? It is impermissible, haram, to get engaged with a woman who's in her waiting period. Right? To get engaged with a woman who's in her waiting period. Now, waiting period is of two types. Either she's in a waiting period after a full separation divorce, which means it's impermissible for her to remarry her husband, or her husband had died. This is the first type of waiting period. So either the husband died, or it's a full divorce. This is the first type of waiting period. Meaning that she can't marry, her husband can't remarry her. Either he died, or this is final separation. The other type of waiting period is where a person divorced his wife the first or second time, and she's in her waiting period. Okay? So the first type of waiting period that we talked about, it is impermissible to clearly state your intention to get engaged. So you may say something like, in her presence, I'm interested in getting married. Hint, 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 hint. Right? Or something like, someone like you would make a good wife. Right? So it's not clear, but it's insinuated, implied. It's okay to imply, but not to clearly make an engagement. However, with a woman who's in her waiting period, through the first or second divorce, it's impermissible to even imply it because she's considered still married.
Do you see that again?
She's considered to be still married because her husband can take her back anytime. Right? Even though she was divorced, while she's in her waiting period, it's considered she is still married. Why? Because her husband has the right to take her back anytime. Right? However, with a woman who's been fully separated, or a woman whose husband died, she cannot remarry her husband. These are two types of waiting periods. Another one of the etiquettes is if Hashim, Umar asks you about Sa'diyah and you know the family, right? You kind of grew up with them, you know who she is, and Umar asks you about Sa'diyah, you have to tell him the good, the bad, and the ugly. You have to be open and honest. Or don't say anything. Right? Don't just say the good. Don't just say the bad. Say everything. Or just don't say anything. Okay? Yeah.
Which one is more recommended? Say nothing.
More recommended to say nothing?
I'm asking.
Well, it's going to depend. It's going to depend.
If you have more bad things to say than good, you should say nothing.
No, it's going to depend on the harm that's going to come out of it, or the benefit. So it's going to depend on the benefit and harm. So you have to weigh benefits and harms. There you go.
Does this include like if they did haram in the past? Do you say that or you don't?
If you are going to speak, you speak, my friend.
Well, what about like backbiting? Isn't it like
That's not backbiting.
it's not considered?
That's backbiting, but it's halal backbiting. Because backbiting is not always haram. You guys knew that?
Yeah, I heard about it.
Uh-huh. So the default is that backbiting is haram. What is backbiting? What is backbiting?
Saying something.
Sorry, what?
Talking about someone behind their back.
Talking about someone bad. Talking ill of someone behind their back. If it's true, it's called ghiba, backbiting. If it's untrue, it's called buhtan, lying. Okay? So backbiting is haram. Unless it's for a good reason. When is backbiting for a good reason?
If you warn a brother about harm and dealing with another brother.
So Imam Nawawi mentioned 6 cases that backbiting is not haram. Or 6 cases where talking about someone behind their back, talking ill about someone behind their back, is not ghiba. 6 cases. How many? 6 cases. And they all involve, or most of them involve, preferring the greater good. Right? So he mentioned, he said, وَالطَّعْنُ لَيْسَ بِغِيبَةٍ فِي سِتَّةٍ مُتَظَلِّمٍ وَمُعَرِّفٍ وَمُحَذِّرٍ وَمُظَاهِرِ فِسْقًا وَمُسْتَفْتٍ وَمِنْ طَلَبَ الْإِعَانَةِ فِي إِزَالَةِ مُنْكَرٍ. So that's 6. The first is a person who is open about their sin. Right? So for example, a person who smokes shisha in the shisha, what do they call them? Shisha what? Bars? Shisha lounge. He's always there. Everybody knows. Right? There's no secret. He's not hiding it. It's not a secret. So if you say to Ala that Muhammad smokes shisha, that's not backbiting. Right? Because he's not shy about it. That's the first case. Right? You're talking about something that someone does in the open. Another is when someone did you wrong. Right? So a person caused me harm, and I tell others that he caused me harm. Okay? This is halal backbiting. Another is this case that we said. So when Umar asks Hashim about Sa'diyah, and he tells him about Sa'diyah and her past, then it's not backbiting. It's halal backbiting. Right? Because he's serious, he's trying to get married. And he wants to know what he's getting into. Another is if you're warning someone, Abdullah wants to go in business with Khalid. Right? And I know Khalid has some bad deals in the past. Okay? So I told Abdullah, you want to be careful. So and so happened with Khalid. That's how many cases? It's 4.
Should you give the more details or just?
You give the details that are needed. Right? So if you are general and it's enough for him to understand what he's getting into, then khalas. General is enough. So you only give details that are important.
So is it kind of like, oh yeah, I heard he had bad business dealings in the past, but you don't say something like, oh yeah, and I hear he smells bad too.
Yeah, what's that have to do with anything? You know,
Yeah.
what's that?
No, I'm just
Yeah,
kidding.
right, exactly. What does that have to do with anything? Anyway. Right. So you're warning him about business, but what does the smell have to do with that?
Yeah.
Unless his smell affects customers, you know, customers don't come in the store because it's such a bad smell, then that would be relevant. So we said what, 4, right? The 5th is mustaftin, someone who's asking for a fatwa, an Islamic ruling. Right? So you go to a sheikh, a scholar, right, and you want to ask him about a certain situation, and only way for you to ask him about the situation is if you talk bad about a person. It's halal backbiting. And 5th and last is if you are seeking someone's assistance to stop or to prevent harm. So Ala is over there breaking the wall, kicking the wall with his foot, and his cousin is helping him, and I feel like if I go and talk to them, they're going to beat me up. So I ask Hamza, I need you to help me with this situation. Ala is doing such and such and so and so. He's vandalizing the masjid with his cousin. I'm afraid if I say something, they're going to beat me up. I need you to help me. That's halal. Halal backbiting. Right. Yes.
The second one, so if you have been wrong, that only applies to you, right? Not like if you know someone has been wronged by a person? Or does that also work?
So it would fall into one of the other categories.
It would fall.
So why are you talking bad about this person? He didn't do you any harm.
Okay.
Why would you be talking bad about him? Would it be to prevent his harm? Then that's halal.
Okay.
Would it be to report him to the authorities to prevent his harm? That's halal. Right? Depends on what's your intention. What are you doing?
Okay. Yeah, makes sense.
But if you're just talking just to, you know, kick the woolly bobo, you guys ever heard that before?
No.
Right? Kicking the woolly bobo, just talking for the heck of it. Then no, it's haram. All right, we'll run through this next one. We talked about lowering your gaze, and it's wajib, it's mandatory to lower your gaze and not look at the opposite sex. But there are times that it's permissible to look at the opposite sex when you are trying to marry her. Okay, so you heard about a person whose name is, I don't know, Khadija, who is such a good person, such and such and so and so. She's beautiful, such and so and so, but it's almost impossible to see her, right? She's always, you know, wearing her niqab or hijab, and her hijab is so tight that she can barely see her face. You know, she doesn't go out unless she's like with her brother or her father, right? Or if she does go to work, it's like really early in the morning where it's dark out, you can't really see her, right? So you want to marry her. She's a good sister, but you know, you want to, you know, look at her. You want her to be beautiful. So what you do is you find a way to, you know, be able to see her. And the things that you're trying to look at are the things that are lawful for you to look at. Right? You don't look at things that are unlawful. So her face, her hands, right? Maybe even her feet, like that. So you want to look at the woman that you want to marry. And likewise, a woman needs to look at the man who she wants to marry. And this is well documented. But if you're just, eavesdropping, you want to see every sister out there because you're looking to get married and you're out there just, looking at everybody, no, that's what you're doing, brother. Playing games with the deen. You don't want to do that. We're talking about a specific sister that you're interested in. Right? Okay, now you learn. But you're at a restaurant, for example, and the waitress looks beautiful, you're all, up in her mug. MashaAllah, sister. No. Deen is not a game. Alright. The requirements for nikah. The requirements for marriage are 5. 5 requirements for marriage. The first is that the husband and wife, need to be identified. So you can't say, Abdullah, I want you to marry my daughter. Right? That's not sufficient. Especially if you have more than one daughter. Like which one? Right? Abdullah, I want you to marry one of the sisters in my masjid. Right? So that doesn't work. So the husband and wife need to be identified. Okay? So that's the first requirement. The second requirement is both parties, meaning husband and wife, woman and man, need to be in agreement. So you cannot force your daughter to marry. There's a lot of talk about this traditionally in the books of fiqh. There are opinions where it is permissible for a father to marry off his young daughter to a person who is, how would you say, rightful, right? Lawfully, or it is common that this person is going to take care of that daughter. Right? There is talk of the permissibility of doing that, but generally, you should not force your daughter to marry. Right? It should not be forceful. So the fact that she's getting into this knowingly, she should understand what she's getting into. And likewise, a husband should not be forced to marry a girl. What happens a lot of times is a mother would say, listen son, if you don't marry this girl, I'm not going to be happy with you. Right? This is a form of being forceful. Or a woman would say to her daughter, listen, if you don't marry this guy, I will never talk to you again in my life. Right? This is bullying. Right? The mother's not going to live with the husband. The wife is the one who's going to live with her. There needs to be second. Remember we talked about second? Right? Comfort. That comfort thing is important. Right? It's important. So both parties need to be in agreement. The third requirement is that the female has a wali. A wali. A wali would be a person who's responsible for her. And this person needs to be a man. Preferably her father, then her brother, then her son, then her uncle, like that. Or her father, her son, her brother, her uncle. Right? And if she does not have a wali, then the person responsible in the community takes on that responsibility. The person who's respected, the person who's looked up to in the community, he takes on the responsibility of that wilayah. That's the third requirement. The fourth requirement is there needs to be witnesses. At least 2. Okay? And these witnesses need to be people who are reliable. Right? They're not drug dealers, for example. Right? They're not people that are constantly causing mischief and or trouble in the neighborhood. Yes, my friend.
What is a wali?
What is a wali? A wali is someone who is responsible for the woman who's getting married. Right? So a father figure. Usually it's the father. But the father's not always around. Okay? Sometimes she has a stepdad. Technically, the stepdad cannot be the wali. Right? Unless, for example, the imam sees fit. So, for example, she appoints the imam to be the wali. And the imam sees fit that the stepdad is, good. And he will be responsible for, and he'll make decisions, good decisions on her behalf. Then the imam can appoint the stepdad to be the wali. So that's okay. There's a way to do that. So he said 4 witnesses, at least 2, and these witnesses need to be good people, honest people. 5, yeah.
Back on the wali point, so what it means by people like make good decisions, where does that entail? Is it saying like after marriage,
Before marriage, and choosing the husband, assisting her with choosing the husband,
Yeah.
right? Being reliable when she's in need. And of course, these things revert back to the norms. Right? So each family has their norms. You may ask, okay, what if there's no norms? Then here, there needs to be an intervention. The 5th requirement is that both husband and wife are free from any defects. Free from any defects. So, for example, a brother can't marry a sister. This is a defect. Right? A man cannot combine between 2 sisters. So this is a defect. Right? If a man is unable to perform intercourse, then it's a defect. Right? Unless she's okay with that. Got it? A woman unable to have children. It's a defect. Unless the husband is okay with that. Right? So free from any defects. Clear? Yeah.
So in that situation, like if a woman can't give birth to children, or if the man, do they have to like say it before then? It's like required.
It needs to be made clear, yeah.
And is that
Because if that's realized later on, that's grounds for annulment.
Okay. And does that work with like any?
But the requirement that we're talking about, I think I kind of misspoke. Not kind of misspoke, I made a mistake. The requirement that we're talking about is requirements that will disallow the marriage to even happen.
Okay.
So if the marriage happens, it's null,
Okay.
right? So we're talking about a man marrying his sister,
Yeah.
a father marrying his daughter, right? Yani,
Yeah.
defects.
Yeah. So would the spouses have to also mention like any medical history they have to a certain extent? If it's like.
That's different. So the marriage can happen in these cases,
Yeah.
and if these things are not clear,
Yeah.
then some medical issues can be grounds for annulment.
Okay.
Not all, some.
So is that the same as like misyad marriage or?
Misyar marriage. Misyar is different.
Oh, but you said like defects, right? So like.
So a defect would be something that would annul the marriage to begin. The marriage is void. So for example, a woman marrying a non-Muslim man. A Muslim woman marrying a non-Muslim man. That's a defect. The man has a defect. He's not a Muslim. It's impermissible.
But like you said, like they can't perform, I guess, intercourse. That's like.
That's
not fulfilling
different.
One of the rights.
That's different. Right, that's different. I made a mistake. That's wrong.
Oh.
Right? So the requirement for marriage, that's the 5th requirement, is where there is a defect in either the husband or the wife. The defect would be something that will disallow the marriage to begin with. The marriage is void. Right? It's dead on arrival. Please. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
The marriage is dead on arrival.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. رسول الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله.
You need to slow your adhan down, my friend. Huh? Speedy Gonzalez. Slow it down, brother. Jazakallahu khairan.
There's no time to respond to it.
Yeah, no time to respond to the what you're saying.
He said it well.
What you say?
He said it well. He said it well.
Oh, he said it well, but not slow enough. Too fast. Right. So those are the requirements for marriage. There are 5. What are they?
They must be identified
Identifying both husband and wife. 2.
in agreement.
Agreement for both. The wali needs to be in agreement.
2 witnesses.
2 witnesses.
Free from any defects.
Free from any defects. What happened? You said what?
No, I said the witness has to be a good person.
Right. The witness. That's a good person. Right. The pillars of a marriage. So these are things that are present before the marriage happens. That's requirements. Right? A pillar of a marriage is a part of the nikah. So we said the nikah is what? What is nikah? It's a contract. Right? So for the contract to happen, these are the pillars of the contract. The first is husband and wife. So remember we talked about requirements and free of defects? Yeah? So I guess one defect that is important to mention is 2 men marrying. Right? That's a defect. It can't happen. Right? 2 women marrying. That's a defect. It can't happen. Okay? Same sex. Marriage or incest. Right? Just can't happen. So the first pillar is the husband and wife. Second pillar is offering. So the wali offers the one who he's responsible for to the husband. I offer you my daughter in marriage. Okay? Or I marry you my daughter. Or I give you my daughter in marriage. Or I give you my daughter's hand in marriage. As long as it's clear. Right? So that's the second. And the third pillar is acceptance. So the husband has to accept. I accept your daughter's hand in marriage. Or I offer you my daughter Khadija in marriage. I accept your daughter Khadija in marriage. So these are 3 pillars. Okay?
Sheikh,
Yes, my friend.
should be, I heard hadith that we should avoid any joke about this.
أحسنت. بارك الله فيك. The
ثلاثة.
Prophet ﷺ said, ثلاث جدهن جد وهزلهن جد. النكاح والطلاق والعتاق. Prophet ﷺ said, 3 things. If you're serious, when you say them, it is serious. And if you're joking when you say them, it is serious. 1 is marriage. 2nd, divorce. 3rd is freeing a slave. So if you say to your wife, ha 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 ha, I divorce you. I was just joking. Divorce happens. Right? If I say to this guy over here, I marry you, my daughter. I see, I didn't say it to you guys, right? I marry you, my daughter, right? And he says, I accept. Hamas. Marriage happens. Right? Even if you're joking.
But doesn't she have to accept too, or? So-
According to what we said, she has to accept. Yes. However, if she's young and she's unable to make decisions for herself, and her father is one who married her, and her father is one who is of his right mind, together, then marriage happens. You don't want to joke about these things. Right? You can't say, oh, I was just joking, and then, you know, let it slide. No, no, no. All right? Fine. There are relatives or people that is impermissible to marry. Okay? Now, the impermissibility is either for life. It's never permissible to marry. Or it's impermissible to marry as long as a certain condition applies. So for example, it's impermissible to marry two sisters at the same time. Right? But if you divorce one of them, then you can marry the other. That's an example. It's impermissible for you to marry your daughter. Right? And that's like forever. It's never permissible for a person to marry their daughter. So, those who are impermissible because of family ties. So it's family ties or marriage or breastfeeding. Right? So the impermissible forever is either because of family ties or marriage or breastfeeding. Aywa. So a baby drinks the milk of a woman who's not his mother. Okay? He drinks her milk. Okay? She becomes his mother. And her children are his brothers and sisters. And her husband is his father. Breastfeeding. Alright, you guys ready? For the ones who are haram to marry, you are the mahram for them. You guys heard about mahram, right? You guys, can hang out, you can travel together, you can, right, go to the movies, whatever. Right? Your brothers, it's like, yeah. So it's mother, grandmother, right? Mother, grandmother. Daughter of a daughter, daughter of a son, daughter of a kada, daughter. Sister, whether it's full, half, sister. Niece, somebody said something? Niece, meaning daughter of a brother, daughter of a sister, full, half, right? Niece. Auntie, maternal, paternal, full, half, any auntie. Okay, so those are what? Mom, child, sister, niece, and auntie. Right? This is through family. So bloodline. As for through marriage, those who are impermissible through marriage, your mother-in-law. Even if you divorce your wife, it's still haram for you to marry your mother-in-law. Right? That's one. Two, your sons or your daughter-in-law. Even if he divorces her, your daughter-in-law. Three, your father's wife, so your stepmom, even if your father divorces her. Now the ones that we mentioned of the girls, likewise works for the girls. Right? So we mentioned women, right? So for a woman it's impermissible for her to marry her father, her son, her grandfather, her kada. Okay? We'll continue after Salah, inshallah. Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.